He was only 11, a curious, kind-hearted boy with a love for video games and family bike rides. Gannon Stauch had no idea that the monster wasn't in his closet, it was already in his home. His stepmother, the woman who tucked him into bed, was secretly plotting his murder. What followed was a horrifying cover-up, a cross-country manhunt, and a trial that revealed unspeakable cruelty. This is the devastating story of Gannon Stauch and how his light was stolen by someone he should have been able to trust.
On the afternoon of January 27, 2020, Letecia Stauch called the El Paso County Sheriff's Office in Colorado Springs. Her stepson, Gannon, she said, had gone to a friend's house and never returned. At first, the case was classified as a juvenile runaway. But something didn't sit right, not with the investigators and not with Gannon's parents. Letecia was home with Gannon that day. She claimed he was sick and had stayed home from school. Yet surveillance footage from a neighbor's camera told a different story. Letecia left the house with Gannon around 10:15 a.m. in her truck, but when she returned at 2:19 p.m., Gannon wasn't with her. As the hours turned into days, law enforcement ramped up the search. Hundreds of volunteers combed woods, fields, and waterways. Drones flew overhead. K-9 units tracked scents. Even the FBI and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children joined in. Gannon's biological parents, Landon and Albert, made tearful pleas on television. They begged for his safe return. But behind the scenes, suspicions were growing. The inconsistencies in Letecia's story began piling up. She told different people different things. That Gannon had gone to play with a friend, that he had gone hiking, that he'd been kidnapped. She even claimed she'd been raped by a man named Eduardo, who then kidnapped Gannon, a story that was completely fabricated. Then came the chilling discovery inside the Stauch home. Investigators found bloodstains in Gannon's bedroom, on his mattress, and even seeping into the carpet pad and concrete floor. The blood evidence was extensive and damning. Letecia tried to clean it up. Investigators found cleaning supplies, bleach, and sponges. But science doesn't lie. DNA confirmed it was Gannon's blood. The case was no longer about a missing boy. It was about a cover-up. Letecia also rented a van during this period. Security footage showed her loading a heavy suitcase into the vehicle. She then drove over 1,300 miles, all the way to Florida, making bizarre stops along the way. Meanwhile, back in Colorado, the search continued with no trace of Gannon, but law enforcement wasn't giving up. They followed Letecia's digital footprint, from GPS data to phone pings, and tracked her journey across the country. On March 17, 2020, a breakthrough. A maintenance worker inspecting the Escambia Bay Bridge near Pace, Florida, found a suitcase. Inside was the decomposed body of Gannon Stauch. The autopsy was brutal. Gannon had been stabbed 18 times, hit in the head, and shot. The coroner listed the cause of death as homicide by sharp force injuries, blunt force trauma, and a gunshot wound. This was not rage. It was calculated torture. Letecia was arrested in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, just days before the body was found. She was charged with first-degree murder, child abuse resulting in death, and tampering with evidence in a human body. What began as a search for a missing child had now become one of the most horrifying filicide cases in Colorado history. From the moment Letecia Stauch was arrested, she tried to escape responsibility. She pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, claiming she had dissociative identity disorder due to childhood trauma. But investigators weren't buying it, and neither was the court. The arrest affidavit revealed chilling details. Letecia had searched online for phrases like, "I hate my stepson," and "blood spatter cleanup." She also sent strange texts to her daughter and husband, trying to deflect blame and control the narrative. In her version of events, she wasn't the killer. It was an intruder, a cartel, or even her husband Albert, whom she accused of having ties to drug trafficking. The lies were desperate and endless. Meanwhile, prosecutors built a powerful case. They brought in forensic experts who described how Gannon's blood was found throughout the house and in the rental van. They showed Letecia's cell phone location data and GPS routes that matched the suitcase's final location. They also had powerful emotional testimony from Gannon's father, Albert Stauch, who broke down in court as he described the betrayal he felt. "I trusted her with my son," he said, "and she killed him." Letecia's only defense witness was Dr. Dorothy Otno-Lewis, a psychiatrist who claimed Letecia suffered from DID, but under cross-examination, even her credibility crumbled. The jury deliberated for just a few hours. On May 8, 2023, Letecia Stauch was found guilty of all charges. The judge, Gregory Werner, called it the most horrific case I have ever seen and sentenced her to life in prison without parole, plus 156 years. The courtroom was silent as the sentence was read. There was no joy, just sorrow and a fragile sense of justice. After the verdict, Gannon's mother Landon said, "Nothing brings my baby back, but at least the world now knows the truth. She can't hurt anyone else." This case not only exposed a calculated killer, but also the quiet vulnerability of children living with abusers in plain sight. Gannon's story is a reminder to listen when something feels wrong, to ask the hard questions, and to never stop fighting for the voiceless. Today, a bench near a school in Colorado bears his name. Flowers appear on it often. Gannon's smile lives on, not in the home where he died, but in the hearts of those who refuse to forget him.
Okay, so we're diving deep today into one of those cases that just sticks with you.
Yeah.
It's the story of Gannon Stauch. And, it starts on January 27th, 2020. That's when Letecia Stauch calls the El Paso County Sheriff's Office. Her stepson, Gannon, had gone to a friend's house, hadn't come back, and initially gets logged as a juvenile runaway. But I think right away, reading through the source material, there's this feeling that something's not right.
Oh, absolutely.
And not just for the investigators, I mean, for Gannon's parents, too.
Yeah, you think about it, like any missing child case in the beginning, it just seems very typical. But there are little things that are off.
Yeah.
Those inconsistencies.
Yeah.
You know, the investigators are trained to look for those.
Right.
This did not feel like a kid who just took off.
Right. And Letecia initially is saying that Gannon was actually homesick from school that day.
Okay.
But then you get this surveillance footage from a neighbor, and it clearly shows Letecia leaving with Gannon in her truck like 10:55 in the morning.
Wow.
And then she comes back alone at 2:19 p.m.
So right away.
Yeah, that footage just blows her whole story.
Yeah, it really does. You have the stepmother, right? The person who's responsible for him.
Right.
Giving one story. And then you have this footage, this objective evidence.
Right.
That says, no, that's not what happened. And it just creates this feeling of unease.
Yeah, and suspicion falls right on her.
Yeah, of course.
So from there, the search just explodes. Hundreds of volunteers.
Wow.
Out searching woods, fields, waterways.
Oh my gosh.
We're using drones. They've got canine units. The FBI gets involved.
Wow.
The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. And you also have these just heartbreaking public pleas from Gannon's biological parents, Landon and Albert.
Right.
Just begging for their son to come back.
It's so hard to watch those.
It is. And while that's all happening in public,
Right.
behind the scenes, investigators are finding more and more inconsistencies.
Yeah, they're trained to look for those discrepancies.
Right.
You can only imagine how many red flags were popping up for them.
And the stories she's giving just keep changing.
Oh, really?
First, it's Gannon went to a friend's house. Then he's hiking.
Okay.
Then she says he was kidnapped.
Oh my gosh.
And then there's this whole totally bizarre story about her being raped by a guy named Eduardo.
Oh, wow.
Who then kidnaps Gannon.
That's crazy.
Totally made up, of course. But why do you think the lies get so outlandish like that?
Well, I mean, it could be panic, right?
Yeah.
Like she's getting more and more scared and just trying to distance herself from what really happened.
Right.
Every news story is less believable, which ironically makes them less convincing.
Yeah.
It's like she's trying to build this whole false reality.
Right. And then the source material calls it this chilling discovery inside the Stauch home.
What was that?
They find bloodstains in Gannon's bedroom.
Oh, no.
And it's not just a little bit, it's on his mattress.
Oh, gosh.
It soaked into the carpet pad, even down into the concrete.
Wow.
I mean, the amount of blood they found was huge.
Right.
And that right there just completely contradicts her initial story.
Yeah, that's a huge turning point in the investigation.
Yeah.
You go from trying to find a missing kid
Right.
to what happened in that room.
Right.
That amount of blood means something really violent happened there.
And she tried to clean it up, you know? They
Wow.
found cleaning supplies, bleach sponges, but you can't fool forensics.
Right.
The DNA testing came back and confirmed it was Gannon's blood.
Wow.
So it wasn't a missing person case anymore.
Right.
It was a cover-up.
Yeah. And trying to clean up the crime scene like that
Yeah.
just makes her look more guilty. It shows that she knew she did something wrong and was trying to hide it.
And then it gets even worse.
What else happened?
Letecia rents a van.
Okay.
And they have security footage of her loading a heavy suitcase into it.
Oh, my gosh.
And then she drives all the way to Florida,
How far is that?
over 1,300 miles.
Wow.
And she's making all these weird stops along the way.
I wonder what those stops were about.
Yeah, it's really strange.
It's really scary to think about someone driving all that way with that kind of secret.
Right, and back in Colorado, everyone's still searching, of course, but they're not going to find him
Right.
because he's not there. But the thing is,
Uh-huh.
law enforcement was tracking her the whole time.
How did they do that?
They were using GPS data from the rental van
Okay.
and pings from her cell phone.
Wow, so they could follow her entire trip.
Pretty much, and it makes you think, you know,
Yeah.
about privacy and how much information is out there,
Right.
but also how important that kind of data can be in an investigation.
It's crazy to think he can't really disappear anymore.
Nope. And then on March 17th, 2020, they get a break in the case.
Oh, really? What happened?
A maintenance worker
Okay.
finds a suitcase near the Escambia Bay Bridge in Pace, Florida.
What was in it?
Gannon's body.
Oh, my God.
They finally found him, but
But he wasn't alive.
no, he was already decomposed.
Oh, that's so sad.
It is, and the autopsy was just horrible.
What did they find?
He'd been stabbed 18 times,
Oh, my gosh.
hit in the head, and shot.
Oh, my God.
The coroner said it was homicide
Right.
from the stab wounds, the blunt force trauma, and the gunshot.
Wow.
But what's really disturbing is they said it wasn't just rage.
What do you mean?
They said it was calculated torture.
What's the difference?
Like it wasn't just a moment of anger.
Right.
It was planned and it went on for a long time.
That's so much worse.
It's awful. And they arrested Letecia just a few days before they found Gannon's body.
Where did they find her?
Myrtle Beach, South Carolina.
Wow.
And they charged her with everything: first-degree murder, child abuse resulting in death,
Oh, my gosh.
tampering with evidence, tampering with a human body.
That's a lot of charges.
Yeah, and the source material calls it one of the most horrifying filicide cases in Colorado history.
Filicide is when someone kills their own child, right?
Yeah, it's just the worst kind of crime.
It's awful.
And from the moment she was arrested, Letecia was trying to avoid responsibility.
What did she say?
She pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity,
Oh, wow.
saying she had dissociative identity disorder.
Did she really?
Yeah, she said it stemmed from childhood trauma. But the investigators and the court didn't buy it.
I mean, that's a really tough defense.
It is.
You have to prove that you didn't understand what you were doing.
Right.
Or that it was wrong.
And in her case, they had a lot of evidence against her.
Yeah, what kind of evidence?
Well, for one thing, they found some really disturbing stuff in her internet search history.
Like what?
Things like, I hate my stepson, and blood spatter cleanup.
Oh, my God.
And she was sending these weird texts to her daughter and her husband.
What was she saying?
Just trying to make it seem like she wasn't involved.
Like she was trying to control the story.
Exactly. And then she starts coming up with all these other explanations.
Like what?
She said maybe it was an intruder.
Okay.
Or a cartel. Even her own husband, Albert.
Oh, wow.
She accused him of being involved in drug trafficking.
She was really throwing everything out there.
Yeah, it was just lie after lie.
It sounds like she was desperate.
She was, but while she was doing all that, the prosecution was building a really solid case.
Okay, how so?
They had forensic experts who talked about all the blood evidence.
Right.
They had the cell phone location data and the GPS routes from the van.
Okay.
All of it pointed right to where they found Gannon's body.
It's hard to argue with that kind of evidence.
It is. And they also had Gannon's father, Albert, testify.
I bet that was tough.
He broke down talking about how much he trusted Letecia.
Oh, God.
And how she betrayed him and killed his son.
I can't even imagine.
It was really powerful testimony.
Yeah, those personal stories can really make a difference.
They can. And Letecia's only defense witness was a psychiatrist.
Okay.
Dr. Dorothy Otnow Lewis, who said she believed Letecia had did this. But the prosecution really went after her during cross-examination.
Yeah, that's what cross-examination is for.
Yeah.
To test how strong the expert's opinion really is.
Right. And they must have done a good job because the jury didn't take long to reach a verdict.
How long did they deliberate?
Just a few hours.
Wow.
And they found her guilty on all charges.
That's not surprising with all that evidence.
No, it's not. And the judge, Gregory Werner, he did not hold back when he sentenced her.
What did he say?
He called it the most horrific case he'd ever seen.
Wow.
And he gave her life in prison without parole, plus another 156 years.
Just a serious sentence.
It is. And the courtroom was totally silent when he said it.
I bet it was.
The source material says there wasn't any joy, just sadness and this feeling of like a fragile sense of justice.
Yeah. I mean, even when someone's convicted, it doesn't bring the victim back.
Right.
And the pain is still there for the family.
And Gannon's mother, Landon, she gave a statement after the verdict.
What did she say?
She said, "Nothing brings my baby back, but at least the world now knows the truth."
Right.
She can't hurt anyone else.
That's so powerful.
It really is. And this whole case, it didn't just expose a killer.
Right.
It shows how vulnerable kids can be when they're living with abusers.
Yeah, sometimes it's happening right in front of us and we don't even realize it.
It's scary to think about. And that's why it's so important for us to be aware,
Right.
to pay attention to the kids in our lives.
Yeah.
And to speak up if we see something that's not right.
It's not always easy, but we have to do it.
We do. And Gannon's story, it's a reminder to trust our instincts,
Right.
to ask those tough questions, and to never stop fighting for those who can't fight for themselves.
Because sometimes we're the only ones who can help.
Exactly. And today, there's a bench near a school in Colorado
really?
with Gannon's name on it.
That's nice.
And people leave flowers there all the time.
It's a good way to remember him.
It is.
That's
And the
great.
source material ends by saying that Gannon's smile lives on, not in the house where he died,
Right.
but in the hearts of those who refuse to forget him.
That's a beautiful thought. It is, and it's a reminder to all of us that we have to be vigilant, we have to pay attention, and we have to speak up for those who can't speak for themselves.
Because you never know when your actions could save a life.
That's right. And it's a responsibility we all share.